Let's talk about the 7 habits that are helping entrepreneurs become completely unrecognizable. Now, this video is for anyone who's ever felt like they're in constant motion, but not making much progress. Or maybe you just wonder if the hard work will ever pay off. Well, let me tell you, it absolutely will pay off, but not by accident. So if a different life and business is what you're looking for, you're definitely in the right place. The difference between where you are and where you want to be in your life and business is not a skills gap, a strategy gap, or even a money gap. It is a habit gap, because habits, good or bad, are the most accurate predictor of your future, because habits are based on principles, and principles always work. So while you may be practicing some of these 7 habits already, let's begin with the first one that serves as the foundation for all others. Habit number 1 is to protect your schedule. It amazes me how careful people can be when it comes to spending their money, but not as careful when it comes to their schedule. And perhaps you notice I didn't say that habit number 1 was to protect your time. I meant to say protect your schedule to emphasize how important it is to write down what you plan to do in advance. You'll often hear people say there aren't enough hours in the day, when the truth really is that so much time gets away from us that it seems like there aren't enough hours in the day. If we took time to plan our activities in advance, even when things pop up, which is inevitable in life, you would have a reference point to be able to refer back to figure out what needs to be done. So of everything that I've planned today that got off track because of the interruption, what's the most important thing that I need to do right now? And then second, third, and so on. People who are high achievers are fastidious about their schedules, borderline ruthless. And if the time you're asking for doesn't align with their priorities, not yours, their priorities, it's pretty much impossible to get on their calendar. And they'll go so far as to have people help them with this. We might call them gatekeepers, but I believe that they're highly valuable assistants that make sure that only the most important things get to them. So they do a great job of filtering requests that just really have no business distracting you. Here's an exercise that I think will be very helpful. I want you to do your best to write down everything that you've done in the past week. I know it's going to be challenging, but just recall whatever you can, and no matter how small it is, write it down. And I want you to ask yourself this question. If you invested cash instead of time into these particular events, how happy would you be with your return on investment? If the answer is you wouldn't be happy, then ask yourself, why not? And then look for patterns that maybe led to you spending the time the way you did in the first place. It's something that I had to do because I was notorious for one critical mistake that ended up being a pattern for me. And that was saying yes on the spot. So if I was out somewhere or someone reached out to me and said, hey, let's get together, I'll say, okay, yeah, I can't think of anything I have going on. Let's do it. Rather than taking time to look at my schedule to make sure that request for time was in line with what I say is important. And the problem is, well, I guess it's not a problem, but it's something that I had to work through as I was kind of untangling this, is once I say yes, I'm going to show up, because I want my word to mean something. But there were many times where I saw something that I committed to on my schedule that I shouldn't have put there in the first place, and it just destroyed me. It really just ended up being something that was on my mind. It was a pain, it was a nuisance, but I had to follow through with it in order to avoid creating the kind of reputation where he said he was going to be there, but he didn't show up. To me, that's worse than the time that I wasted. But in order for me to stop wasting time like that, I had to get in the habit of saying, you know what, that should be okay, but let me get back to you. Let me see what I have going on, and then I'll follow up with you, because I don't want to tell you yes right now and then something comes up and I'm not able to make it. If maybe a day or two later you think about it and it's still worth doing, then perhaps it's good to put it on your schedule. But then if you realize this is a waste of time or just something I'm not prioritizing right now, then at least you've protected your schedule. So if you want to become unrecognizable in life and business, build the habit of protecting your schedule. But you can't protect what you don't have. So if you haven't yet built the discipline of giving every activity an assignment and scheduling it in advance, really so you have a chance to think on paper and to put things in their proper order and context, then I would go ahead and get started on that right away, because this is going to be the single greatest investment you can make in yourself. Now, whenever the topic of scheduling or calendars comes up, people automatically think about time blocking, morning routines, and saying no to meetings. And while those activities have their place, the most important question you need to ask on the topic is, what is my life and business demanding of me in the first place? Because when you think about it in those terms, you may realize that you're spending a lot of time doing things that you have no business doing in the first place. Which leads me to habit number 2, and that is to build systems before you need them. I love this quote by Peter Drucker, who says that there is nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which need not be done at all. I want to paint a picture for you, because this happens all the time. You have an entrepreneur who's been grinding away for years, manually sending invoices, booking every call personally, confirming calls, chasing contracts and payment, delivering everything by hand, all the while thinking once I get more clients, then I'll put a system together. Well, once you get more clients, everything's going to collapse, you and the business, all because you postponed what was already necessary, thinking it'll be easier in the future. The goal is a larger book of business, but you have to have systems in place to handle it. So what's the lesson here? The time to build your house is before the storm, not during the storm, because systems are not a reward for success, they're a prerequisite for success. Now think about your business right now. Is there anything that only works because you do it personally? Does the place fall apart if you take a day off? Is there any process that only lives in your head? If so, you're the bottleneck, so you need to document it, automate what you can, and delegate the rest. Now, personally, I use High Level to manage my entire business, and I'm offering 30 days free in the description box. It handles my social media, my email, absolutely everything. Try it out for 30 days. Now, business is challenging enough, and people are in your niche trying to put you out of business and take your customers. And the saddest thing I see in business is when a person whose dream is to see the business grow is the reason it dies. So don't be the person that thinks that only you can do it, and if you don't do it yourself, it's not going to get done. You need to put the systems in place for you to be able to run your business and scale it efficiently. Now, once you have your infrastructure in place, something interesting starts to happen. You stop asking, how do I get more clients, and start asking a question that's far more important. What am I actually charging for the services I deliver? And that leads me to habit number 3, price the gap, not the work. Now let's walk through a scenario. Let's say that you're a business coach working with a personal training client trying to grow her client base. Now you've worked with her for 6 months, and by the end of those 6 months, she goes from charging $500 a package to $2,500 a package and closes 3 clients a month. That's an extra $6,000 a month, or $72,000 of additional revenue over the next year. And you only charge $1,800 for that 6-month engagement. Now that's what happens when you price the work instead of pricing the gap. You've worked with this client for 6 months and they saw $72,000 of increased annual revenue, and you haven't even paid taxes on the $1,800 you charged for the transformation. Now think of it this way. If you told a client you'd work with them for 6 months for a fee of, let's say, $20,000, and they would increase their revenue over 3 times that amount using methods and processes that they can apply in perpetuity, they would take that any day of the week. And anyone that wouldn't, you shouldn't be working with in the first place. The gap is the distance between your client's current reality and where they want to be. And the wider the gap, the more valuable the solution. This is why a surgeon charges more than a general practitioner. Not because the appointment is longer, but because the outcome is more valuable. When you price the gap, 2 things happen. Your clients take the engagement seriously because they've invested at a level that requires that, and you start attracting people who actually want to change, not people who just want to check a box. So remember, don't price your information, price their transformation. Premium pricing demands your very best because serious clients expect your best. Now this requires focus, and I mean real focus, which brings me to one of the most difficult, the most challenging habits on the list. Habit number 4 is commit to one thing until it works. I'll be the first to admit it, but many of us are notorious for having countless tabs open on our browser. So how many tabs do you have open? Not on your browser, but in your business. There's the podcast in January that you started, then the Instagram strategy you've been working on, the course you've been meaning to finish, the group program that you haven't quite launched, and of course the YouTube channel that was supposed to have Mr. Beast afraid you're going to eclipse his channel. Every successful business I've ever studied had a season of what I can only describe as almost irrational focus. One thing, one platform, one offer, all in. Not until it got difficult, not until you got tired, but until it worked. James chapter 1 verse 8 says that a double-minded person is unstable in all their ways. And that's not just a spiritual principle, that's a business principle. Entrepreneurs who become unrecognizable aren't doing more than anyone else. They're just doing fewer things longer and at a deeper level. They've used the power of commitment to inoculate themselves against shiny object syndrome, because there's always going to be a new platform, a new trend, or a new strategy. So pick one thing and go all the way in. And again, I'm as guilty as anybody. Let everything else wait. And if it's still worth pursuing in the future, then you can address it then. You can commit to one thing strategically and still have a negative outcome. That's just a part of business. This happens to many entrepreneurs who are building in the dark. They don't actually know whether or not what they're doing is working until it's too late to course correct. And that brings me to a habit that almost never gets talked about in the entrepreneurial space. But before we get to that, if this is landing for you, please drop a comment with the habit so far that's hitting the hardest for you. I read every single comment, and if you haven't already, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Now, these last 3 habits are where we start to turn up the heat a little bit, so stay with me. Habit number 5 is know your numbers. I spent nearly 2 decades in wealth management before I became a business consultant, and the single biggest thing that I saw destroy otherwise solid financial plans when I started working with people wasn't bad strategy, it was bad awareness. That's why there were so many messes that I had to clean up. People didn't know what they had, they didn't know what was coming in, what was going out, or the gap between the two. And sometimes people would just put their statements in a drawer and not even look at them because they spent too much time watching the news and they were afraid. The same thing happens in business every single day. I work with coaches and consultants who tell me business is great, things are moving according to plan. Then we sit down and I ask them 3 questions. Number 1, what did you net last month? What is your effective hourly rate? And what does it cost you to acquire a client? And they have no idea. They sit there with this blank stare on their face, or they start trying to throw something at me thinking I'm going to accept it at face value when they're really just guessing. This isn't because they're bad at business. It's because they've never thought or were never taught to look and really pay attention to these things. They didn't know what the key drivers were. Now, I love agricultural metaphors, so here's one based on Proverbs 27:23, which says, know the state of your flocks and put your heart into caring for your herds. So how can you possibly care for your herds if you don't know what your herds need? How can you make wise business decisions with inaccurate information? Just because the check clears doesn't mean that the business is healthy, and this also applies to your personal finances. So remember, it's not what you make, it's what you keep that makes all the difference. So what I want you to do is start with revenue, then your profit margin, then your client conversion rate. These are very important numbers that you need to know. Be sure to track them every single week because it's the business that knows its numbers that can navigate and scale and also see when problems are on the horizon and they can adjust before they become catastrophic. You have to do what it takes for your business, not just to survive, but thrive. When you consistently review your numbers, there's a shift that takes place in how you manage money and time. You start to think much longer term, which gives you a broader horizon through which to make decisions. You're not just thinking about weeks, months, and quarters. It's much bigger than that. And that's more important than any tactic I could possibly give you, which leads me to habit number 6. Think in decades, not just quarters. Warren Buffett did not become the greatest investor of a generation because he was better at picking stocks. He became the greatest investor of a generation because he had vision. This helped him to hold on to stocks longer than anybody else was willing to because he wasn't thinking short term. He was thinking in decades, not in quarters. And many entrepreneurs run on a 90-day clock, sometimes shorter than that. If they don't see results in 90 days, they pull it, they pivot, and they restart. And this is the reason that they're not building any kind of compounding momentum that actually leads to lasting wealth, because they keep interrupting their own growth before it has time to materialize. Patience can be your competitive advantage because many of your competitors will waste time chasing trends without ever actually building anything of value. They quit before the results arrive because they're impatient or because they're busy looking at what someone else is doing rather than following their plan. So what does thinking in decades actually look like in practice? It means you stop asking yourself every 30, 60, or 90 days whether something is working and start asking yourself whether you're building something that will be standing in 10 years. Let your competition worry about being fast. You're playing a completely different games because your mindset is focused on the future, not on distractions because they will present themselves and you have to stay focused. Now, here's the thing about everything we've examined so far. It all assumes one thing, and that's you have an audience to deliver all of this to. And honestly, I wish this was something that I prioritized much sooner in my entrepreneurial journey. Habit number 7 is to build an audience that actually belongs to you. In 2013, a platform called Vine had hundreds of millions of users. Creators built real influence, real income, and audiences that trusted them. And then in 2017, it was gone overnight. Twitter bought them a few years prior, and they just decided to shut it down. Now, a year later, in 2018, we watched this happen with Facebook pages, and we saw it in 2025 with TikTok, where that almost got completely shut down. And we're going to watch it happen over and over again, no matter what platform comes next. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth about all of these platforms. We don't own any of them. You don't own them, and I don't own them. They can change the algorithm tomorrow and cut your reach by 80%. They've done it before, and they'll do it again because they will always do what's in their best interest. And if businesses get hurt in the process, then so be it. They can throttle your content, change the rules, charge you whatever they want to reach the people who already said they want to hear from you. So even though they want to hear your content, people are going to charge you for it. You want to become an unrecognizable entrepreneur? Begin building what I call owned media. Email is still the best way to keep your community engaged. You don't have to worry about an algorithm standing between you and the people who've already said yes. And even though email platforms can change, you could always back up your email list on an Excel spreadsheet or something like that in order to make sure that if something is compromised, you're able to pivot and still communicate with the people that trust you. It's a great way to release new content and to distribute your newsletter, which hopefully you're using far more to simply add value than to sell stuff. This is why I created the Prosperous newsletter, where I go deeper into the concepts that I teach and provide as much value as I possibly can. You can get this totally free, link in the description. Now here's a practical step. Every piece of content you create should have one job beyond delivering value. It should move someone from borrowed attention to owned attention, from the platform's ecosystem to your ecosystem. You don't need a massive list to get started. You need a clear reason for somebody to join and consistent value that you're going to send them. That's the foundation. You don't want to overwhelm and bombard people by selling something every 15 minutes. Be sure to educate and inform, and most importantly, help people implement what you teach so they reach their goals. Remember, people are following you to get what they want, not just for the sake of following you. This is not about followers, it's about relationships. So don't put those relationships at risk by leaving them exposed. You have a responsibility to protect your audience, so don't leave this to chance. Okay, so there you have it, 7 habits that are already separating the entrepreneurs who become unrecognizable from everyone else who's still grinding without direction. Now, none of these are complicated. Every single one of them you can start right now. But here's what I've learned over years of working with entrepreneurs at every level, whether in wealth management or in coaching and consulting. Information changes nothing. Action changes everything. So pick one habit from the list, okay? Just one, and go all in on it for the next 30 days. Then come back and let me know what shifted. Leave a comment, because what shifted for you likely will be a blessing to other people. So if you found this useful, which I hope you have, share it with anyone you feel like might benefit. And please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to go deeper, join the Prosperous newsletter, linked in the description. Every week I provide education and practical insights to help you build your business and wealth God's way. Take care, and I'll see you next time.